People who quit their jobs on the first day, what made you say, I'm done with this? Story 1. When I found out their time clock system didn't track hours worked, but the minutes spent typing or moving your mouse. And it'd take random screenshots too. If you're in a video meeting, I guess they get to take pictures of you too. All that, and they wanted this installed on my personal computer. That and a few other reasons made me back out after one day. Story 2. It was a telemarketing company selling timeshares around the U.S. My first call was an old lady who told me the story of how her husband fell down the stairs 2 weeks ago and died right in front of her. My manager was over my shoulder listening in and said something like, "Okay, now pitch the package." I left immediately. Edit grammar. Story 3. Line job in a factory that assembled magazines. Because of all the paper sliding along the tracks, little bits would gum up the gears, and they wanted us to reach inside and pull out all the wads of paper scrap about once an hour, while someone manually held down a button that paused the machine from moving, refused, clocked out for lunch, and left. Story 4. By the way, we never mentioned it at the interview, but you will get 50% pay for 6 months till your trial period is over. I was halfway into my first shift when they sprang that on me. I turned around and walked out. No discussion. Didn't say a word. Just left. Answer. I interviewed for a job like that like 20 years ago. Factory worker in a box company. They advertised $20 per hour, which was pretty decent 20 years ago. Go through the entire interview, walk the floor with the hiring manager, then he offers me the job, and I said good because I liked the pay. He turns around and says that pay is actually not $20 per hour, it's $10 per hour. They only advertised $20 per hour because if they were upfront about the pay, then no one would apply. I asked him if that switcheroo actually worked on anyone, and he smiled and said yes. I told him it didn't work on me and thanks for wasting my time. Guy was such a cunt. As I turned to walk out the door, he said, "You don't have a job. I think you have time to waste." Annoying and sleazy, trying to take advantage of unemployed people. Story 5. I was in high school, working 3 part-time jobs. I'd gotten hired as a cashier at a supermarket. I really just wanted to be a stock boy, but oh well. I show up to work and the manager isn't there. So I just start asking people like, "Hey, I'm new. How do I clock in? What do I do?" Eventually, someone clocks me in like an hour late. They put me on a register, show me the produce code sheet like once, then left me alone. No clue how to do a sale, no idea how to do coupons, etc. The manager shows up halfway through and yells at me in front of a customer for not knowing produce codes. Even the customer was like, "Hey, it's his first day. Calm down." Time for my lunch break. Nobody has shown me where the staff room is, so I just buy lunch from the store and eat it in the cafe area. Manager storms in, takes my tray, throws the rest of my food away, and goes off that I cannot eat where customers are, that I'm stupid, etc. I just got up, threw the apron at her, and walked out. Absolutely ridiculous. I did, however, go back and demand my check for hours worked because that. Story 6, I was injured and they told me to keep working. I was loading trucks at RPS, by the way. Went to the boss and said, "Who do I tell if I want to quit?" He responded, "Me." I said, "Okay, I quit." He asked me to finish my shift, but I laughed in his face. Story 7. I was laid off from my first job back when I was in high school due to the housing crisis in the 00s. I was a dishwasher at a restaurant. When new management took over, they offered everyone their old jobs back, and I accepted. I tried to take my CD player that I had left there before the layoff home with me, and I was told that I was stealing as it was company property since it was there when they took over. Everyone in the kitchen attested that it was my CD player, but the new manager wouldn't hear of it, so I just walked out with it. I was called later that night by HR telling me I was fired for stealing company property. I guess I didn't quit, but I was going to do it anyway. Story 8. I was between jobs and got a temp job helping with payroll, and they told me I would have to hold paychecks for people who did not return their uniform, and when I pointed out this was illegal and showed them the law, they said to do it anyway, so I quit and went back on unemployment until I found a real job 3 weeks later. Quitting a job because they want you to break the law gets you unemployment in most states. Story 9. In high school, a friend of mine talked up this warehouse job he had for an online surplus store. They gave him a bunch of free electronics and sports equipment. As a high school student, that seemed pretty cool, so I decided to try working there for the summer. Now I realize that was a red flag. On my first day, they asked me to package a commercial range hood that had to be shipped to Alaska. They had no packing material or boxes and refused to buy any. I created a box by piecing together scraps of cardboard and covered them in a ton of tape. Then I filled the box with crumpled printer paper from the office. The manager saw me doing this and proceeded to yell at me for 10 minutes because I wasted their printer paper. I laughed at him and walked out of there. Of course, my friend later told me the range hood was destroyed in shipping and the manager was livid. A year later, The business was busted for selling stolen GPS units. Story 10. Work in IT and got a new job as a sysadmin. And on the first day found support tickets where the guy before me was required to track every second of his time through it. Several tickets that read something like, cleaned office, 15 minutes. No thanks, I'm not a child that needs supervision. Luckily, my old job let me come back like I never left. Story 11. Got hired as a farmhand for a potato farmer as a summer job from college. Minimum wage through the local job office where I was told, this guy has gone through a lot of workers. First thing he told me to do was change the oil in the tractor and pointed to where things were. Now I had changed the oil in my car, but that hardly compared. I managed. Next, I was given a suicide jack and told to walk out to the field where a 40 tire on one of those huge sprinkler systems had slipped off the railroad tie going over the ditch, and use the jack to get it lifted out of the ditch and somehow use my 130 pounds frame to move it back onto the railroad tie. I managed. Lunchtime came, and I had trudged back from the field with the jack. The farmer sees me and says, I'm going to the house for lunch. Please eat in your car. Luckily, I had brought my own lunch, but it was 90 degrees out, and I was a sweaty, filthy mess from what I'd done so far and had no way to clean up. I managed. For the afternoon, the farmer had me perch on the back of the potato planter while he drove it down the field, and I had to hop back and forth between the planter bins and manually make sure the potatoes were dropping into the feeder tubes. I managed. Got a call shortly after getting home asking if I'd like an assembly line job in an air-conditioned factory. Never went back to the potato farm. Story 12. Only time I've ever just walked off a job site. I was homeless and answered a Craigslist ad for a roofing job. I'd never done roofing before. I was working for a pair of tweakers from NYC. After spending most of the day doing standard labor, bringing materials up a ladder, putting down roofing material and stomping down on it after they hit it with a blowtorch, etc. They wanted me to stand on a 2-inch wide beam that was rotten and slick from rain, visibly unstable, with no restraints or safety equipment whatsoever. And they wanted me to stand on it and use a sledgehammer to smash out as much decaying roof as I could until I hit a point where the roof was solid again. I told the guy I wasn't cut out for that type of work. He told me to quit being an upstate vagina. I told him to find a downstate penis because someone is going to die under their tutelage and I'm not going to let it be me. He refused to pay me for the 6 hours of intense physical labor I'd already worked, and I had to panhandle to get bus fare back. But I didn't die. Story 13, I got a summer job as an HR office assistant while in college. They told me on my first day that they had to fire some people later in the week, and they needed me to do it because they didn't want to. I didn't come back the next day. Not only did I, of course, not want to do it, but I was shocked at the callous disrespect they had for the employees that they wanted to fire. If you want to destroy someone's livelihood, have the balls to do it yourself. Story 14. Got hired to be a machinist, which I had years of experience. Show up first day and did usual paperwork stuff, then expected to be sent to shop and run Haas machines. Instead, they said, well, we're fully staffed in machine shop and we're transferring you to fiberglass department, which I had no experience. Walked into shop and it was a total nightmare with no PPE devices or a turret booth and told you'll be fine. Stood around till lunch, then just left. Called me every day for a week, wondering where I was. That job has now been posted on Indeed for 3 straight years, lol. Story 15. I applied to a local newspaper for advertising sales, thinking I would be making a lot of cold calls. Instead, I was being trained on ways to sneak past things like front desk reception so that I could knock directly on a business owner's office doors. This was in a small town where I knew a lot of the local business owners already, and the thought of behaving that way around people I had known my whole life was just distasteful. That and learning there was no wage, just commission. I did that first day of training, and then at the end of the day gave them back all the training materials and apologized for wasting their time, but that I couldn't see myself doing very well at that job. Story 16. When I was 21, I got hired on the spot at a village inn. I didn't know enough at that time to know that's a huge red flag. When I showed up for my first shift, I was shocked and appalled at how disgusting the kitchen was. When I watched a server drop somebody's pancakes on the kitchen floor, pick them up and put them back on the plate, then walk out and serve them to someone, I was done. Story 17. I started a job in an office, normal cubicles, offices, and reception. I went to the washroom and it was locked. I asked someone if there was another washroom. They said, ask reception for the key. Really? I went to reception and felt really humiliated, but I asked for the key. She handed it to me and asked if I needed toilet paper. I said it's all right, false alarm, got my stuff and left. Story 18. Started a sales job just after graduating, which I was happy to do because I'd done what I thought was a similar job while studying. Morning was as expected, induction stuff, a few odd characters, manager seemed okay. After lunch, they said, okay, now we need to get in a car and go do some door-to-door sales. This was supposed to be an office based on the phone type of job, so I was already thinking, nope. After about 45 minutes of chatter and slight panic, because the person who usually took people around had gone off somewhere, someone asked if a car with a specific reg plate belonged to anyone. It was my car. Manager asked me to drive the team to an area of town for the door-to-door. They said they'd give me a separate payment for fuel. I said my insurance wouldn't cover them, so I can't take the risk. They said to call my insurance and confirm. I said I'd go outside to do that while having a cigarette. I did not smoke. I got in my car and went home. Story 19. Not quite the first day. I have a mortgage, but been through the entire interview process. Small pay rise plus quite a generous company pension. All confirmed in writing. Cool, thinks I. Leave my existing job and start at the new place. A week or two in, HR does their induction, and the generous company pension doesn't exist. It's statutory minimum. Obviously, I raise this because that's not what I signed up for. The answer comes back, tough, that's the pension. Excuse me, but we agreed in writing that it wasn't. Don't care, that's the pension. They were astonished when I put in my resignation about a month later. Story 20. Worked in an Amazon warehouse. I had just finished grad school and was applying for jobs. This was May 2020. The place was unbelievably hot, especially while wearing a mask. The guy training us kept screaming at us, come on, let's get this money, let's go, yeah. Shit like that. It was a 12-hour shift of back-breaking walk. By the end, I thought I was going to die. I left that day, went home, went to sleep, got up at 5 a.m., and redoubled my efforts to find a job. Got a job 1 month later working from home. Story 21. I went through 3 interviews to get the job. I arrived 10 minutes early on my first day. The manager of the location I was told to report to had no idea that I had been hired. They called the person that instructed me where and when to report. That person said they needed to check their notes and call back. I didn't wait. I just excused myself and thanked the manager for his time. Later in the afternoon, the person who hired me called and was angry that I was a no-show at the very place I showed up for. Story 22. I got this job cold calling local businesses to sell them printer toner subscriptions. Weirdest, most awkward job prospect I've ever encountered. Came in at around 4 p.m. Place was an empty room with a desk against one wall, a PC, and a phone. Owner had an office in the back. Owner has me put together his office chair for him. Watch him try to write an email. He can barely write a coherent sentence. Finish the chair. Then instructs me to pull up a program on the PC and call the numbers. Ask them if they want to buy toner subscriptions. Okay. Spend the next 3 hours awkwardly calling places, asking if they want to buy toner. No script, no product descriptions, no printer models, completely flying by the seat of my pants. Many ask if I will install it for them. IDK. No one on either side has any idea what's going on. I leave, immediately text that I'm not coming back. Owner texts back that I'm not qualified for the position. Never got paid for the tilde 4 hours. Story 23. After 3 interviews, negotiations, and tests, they agreed on my salary and we started on Monday. I come in, do all the paperwork, and get assigned a PC, desk, etc. Before coming in, I saw the red flag that they had a high turnover, but they agreed on a really good salary for me. All of a sudden, I get an email from CEO that he wants to test me again and gave me 3 complex tasks from his side business totally unrelated to my skills and position in the company, like asking a doctor to write a code. He told me just do it because you're working for me from now on. I stood up and went through the door. Half an hour later, the HR calls me and asked to come back. I told her to have a good day and never contact me again. At my new job, I have a colleague who worked there for 1 year. She started telling me crazy stories about the boss and the company. I didn't dodge a bullet, but rather a rocket strike. Story 24. Not me, but a friend. This friend is a very good-looking woman. It was to be her first job out of college, working as a research tech in the lab of a Nobel Prize winner. She thought it was weird that at her interview he told her she needed to wear a skirt to work since he wanted people to look professional. But in a lab, since he was older from a more formal time, she thought, oh, well, okay. At the first lab meeting, he sits next to her at the table, while one of the students/postdocs is making a presentation. As soon as the lights went down, she feels a hand on her thigh, and it's the Nobel laureate, and he is working his hand up her thigh. She squirms but doesn't do anything and quit that day. I asked her why she didn't go to HR, and she said she didn't think it would matter since he was Mr. Big Shot. Later, turns out she's heard stories about him from multiple female employees. He died before he could get Me Too'd. Story 25. Basic restaurant server job. I was in college. The drive was kind of long, and as a college student, that matters a lot. I was mostly getting a job due to feeling like I was inadequate if I didn't have one. So I go buy the black clothes required and show up. But the clothes weren't black enough due to having a gray lining around the button-up shirt's collar and cuffs on the inside of the shirt. It barely peeked through under certain angles. They told me to leave and come back when the clothes fit their requirements. So I drove back to campus, called them up, and quit on the phone. It was just way too much BS to deal with and did not bode well. Story 26. 2 hours into my first shift at a glassware shop, I'd broken 175 pounds worth of stuff by accident while dusting the shelves, while wrapping items that a customer had just bought, and some things I swear broke just because I existed too closely to them. The owner, who was the artist/glass blower, to his infinite credit, didn't want to charge me or take it out of my pay. He actually said I did a great job with the customers and wanted me to stay, but my nerves couldn't take it, so I walked out carefully. Story 27. Wasn't told I'd be on the operations floor on my first day, didn't bring my PPE, got handed company-issue steel toe boots, cheap and nasty, which promptly began to tear my feet to shreds. I show my supervisor my bleeding feet and tell him I can be back in an hour with my own boots and could then finish my shift. He told me if I leave to get them, don't bother coming back. Easiest walkout ever. Story 28. Responded to an ad for a warehouse manager position back in 2001 when we were in a recession. So I was eager to take something. Interview went well enough, but description of duties was vague, had to start next morning. I show up, and there's a couple of dozen guys all ready to head out and get going. I don't remember why now, but I felt at the time like I was getting caught up in some illegal operation. I get in a car with 2 other guys, and I'm getting worried. We drive to a town 40 minutes away. I then find out what the job is. These were door-to-door salesmen, except they were going into businesses and trying to sell crap to employees. Since I was far away from home without my car, I had to help them sell. We spent like 10 hours going into convenience stores, gas stations, etc., peddling junk. We were the reason no solicitation signs exist at businesses. One of the most miserable days of my life, and I was paid $0. Story 29. I took a job as a residential maintenance tech for a 500-unit apartment complex. The company that owned the complex owned about 2,000 units all over the city. I've been doing maintenance for 10 years at this point, and I know my shit. Anyway, they send me out with this meth head-looking dude to train me. We do a few work orders, and I watch him ghetto rig stuff instead of actually fixing it. I kept my mouth shut until he decided to duct tape a clearly busted sewer stack. I was like, bro, I saw Fernco's as the shop. Let's just get a Fernco. He literally tore into me about him having seniority, and he won't be told what to do by some guy who just started. Whatever. I bit my tongue because I had bills to pay. The next work order after that, we go into this woman's apartment while she was at work to fix her sink. He tells me the tenant is hot as and goes into her laundry basket and pulls out a pair of panties to sniff. That was it for me. I walked out, went to the leasing office, explained what my last 4 hours were like, and I would be contacting the authorities and the news about what I witnessed. They offered me $3,000 to keep my mouth shut. Unfortunately, I needed the money, so I took it. Story 30. There are numerous stories about teachers who get jobs in Alaska bush villages. Getting to remote villages is described as flying there in increasingly smaller airplanes. These people have taken the job with zero idea of what life in the bush is like. They fly to the village in a small, single-engine prop plane, get out, take one look at the place, and get right back in the airplane. It's not nearly as common now that information is much better, but in the not-too-distant past, not unheard of for sure. Story 31. I came in to be one of 4 retail managers for a museum with 4 stores. While training me, I overheard multiple associates, who I would be managing, swearing and yelling at customers. Then one of the other managers training me to log the safe yelled and screamed at me that I didn't know how to count because the safe was $1 short. We later found the dollar on the floor behind the desk she had been counting at. Then the district manager above me spent the entire day sitting at the cameras, listing reasons to write up associates, which included seeing the outline of a girl's phone through her back pocket, even though she never took it out, an associate going to the bathroom twice during his shift. They were only permitted 1 break, apparently, and an associate not asking literal children to donate to the museum. Great first day, even better last day. Story 32, technically second day. Started working at a car dealership as a lot porter. Me and other brand new co-worker were ordered, to straighten a line of cars during what was the worst thunderstorm that year. Turned out multiple tornadoes and tons of lightning. Boss said if we didn't do it right then to not worry about coming back, so we both quit on the spot. Still waited out the storm, though. Story 33. Not the first day, but I quit teaching less than a month into it. The list why is pretty big. taking away all my planning time and then constantly criticizing me by telling me my lessons seemed improvised. No shit. The district as a whole being completely unorganized. The required professional development. Days were such a mess they were just salt in an open wound. Not taking an extremely severe daily behavioral situation in my class seriously, even when me and the other third-grade teachers were all begging administration to help every day. The principal basically sabotaging my progress with one of the students from the previous point just because. The district deciding to move me and the last 7 hired teachers to different schools due to enrollment changes, telling me about it on Tuesday morning, expecting me to teach until Friday, and then be ready at the new school Monday morning with no time to prep. I quit on the spot and walked out at the end of the next day. Story 34. I applied at this massive nightclub, event space, conference center as a busser. I thought I would be grabbing drinks, etc. When I arrived for my first day, they got what had to be 1,000 chairs stacked in this massive warehouse room, and they asked me to carry them one by one. You could do 2 or 3 at a time, but it was quite heavy. Outside and into a different space. Across the street, keep in mind it was winter and freezing outside, and I was dressed to be indoors for the day. Anyway, I carried about 200, which took hours before saying whatever. I was freezing and tired, and this was going to take more than the 8-hour shift and the same thing next day. I didn't even tell anyone I was leaving. I just dropped off the chair and went home. I didn't ask for my pay for the 2 or 3 HRS, and they never messaged me about it, LOL. I was so happy to get home. The position was advertised as event bussing, which I get can include cleaning and setup, but this was just manual labor. I wore a really nice black-collared shirt, dress pants, a belt, and my only pair of leather dress shoes, BTW. They told me to dress this way, did my hair, etc., as it was advertised to be fancy events. Lol, I was not dressed to move chairs for 8 hours in the cold. Story 35. I got employed by a fast food place and went in for orientation and training for one day. After it was done, the manager said to me, "I'll call you to tell you when you can come into work." She never called. After 4 days of waiting, I finally called her and asked why didn't she call me. She said, "Oh, I shouldn't have told you that. We were wondering where you were. You can come in tomorrow." No thanks. Story 36. Got a job tarring roofs in the summer in Maryland. Sweating my ass off, but I could barely keep up. One big dude was teaching me the proper way to spread the tar evenly with a giant mop. He kept prompting me as I was going, then suddenly stopped talking. I look over and his eyes have rolled back and is starting to fall over into the hot tar we just spread. I grabbed him and started screaming for the other guys as he was too big and we were both heading for the tar. They grabbed both of us and got us off the roof. Paramedics for him and the water hose for me. When lunchtime rolled around, I told the boss, "I'm out of here." He asked if I was coming back tomorrow and I said hell no and left. I lasted about 4 hours. Story 37. The boss hid the bathroom key and had everyone ask him for permission to use it. I have IBS, and I got the runs the first day, of course. When I asked for the key the second time after 30 minutes of using it the first time, he asked me, "Again?" The third time he started chewing me out. I literally turned around on my heel and got to the locker room to take my stuff and go. He then tried to block my way out when I sat on my motorcycle to drive away. Story 38. I worked for a gangmaster being sent to different factories for temp gigs. Turned up to one place, had to sign a sheet to be given a knife and a penny, then spent 3 hours scraping carrots that were frozen from being pulled out the ground still. I was covered in muck and my fingers were frozen, and I caught them with the knife, started bleeding and got shouted at for being so clumsy. That noise. I got sent to first aid, got a plaster, and just left. Story 39. It was time for me to clock out. They knew I asked for the hours I got because my then kindergartner gets off the bus at that time. And if no parent is present at the bus stop, they take the child back to school. If you miss picking them up from the stop enough times, they contact CPS. I was already going through a divorce and was on probation, so I really didn't want any reason beyond what is necessary for me to contact my PO. You have to check in with the GM before you leave, so I did that. She told me I can't leave yet because my relief had not shown up yet. I told her I can't stay. I have to pick up my kid from the bus stop. She told me, looking dead at my eyes, "Well, I don't care about that." And I snapped back without skipping a beat. "Neither does my PO and CPS. I'm leaving now." And the staff that heard me tell her that were in absolute shock, I even spoke back like that. I walked out the door to never return. You want me to jeopardize my freedom, custody of my children, the safety of my children? You want me to jeopardize all things precious to me at $7.14 per hour because some tard is late for work? I knew then, if that's how they treated me on day one, then what other type of ending was there going on? Yeah, pass. Story 40. I started the day at 7 a.m. at a little technical workshop where we repaired electronics. At 8 a.m., I had learned that all 3 coworkers were there for 1 month max and the team lead resigned yesterday, and I was to follow her up. At around 9 a.m., the wife of the big boss waltzes in, verbally assaults the coworker next to me and tell him if she ever sees him with headphones in again, she fires him on the spot. She doesn't even greet me. I let it sink in. 11 a.m. I decide to explore the facility on my own since no one is showing me around. I learn there is no break room, only a shoddy toilet outside. You are supposed to eat your lunch in your car outside. And to my absolute horror, that there is no coffee machine on premise and people who brought one saw them destroyed. At 12 a.m., I walk into the boss's office. I say I've never seen such a workplace and he just has to pay me from 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. and I'm out. Fought for a month with him and had to send a lawyer to get what I was owed because he wouldn't pay me unless I finished my workday, which I wouldn't have been able to in those conditions. Funny story is, since that day, my first question in any job interview was, do you guys have a coffee machine? It's my, do they care about their people kind of thing. If the answer is no, I walk. I did it twice to flabbergasted recruiters. Story 41. I worked for a publishing startup in 1992. Our job was to put folded magazines in screen doors across West Omaha. I had a driver's license, so I got to drive the van for the runners and drop off bins at intersections for the runners to restock. The vehicle was a van in the academic sense, in that it had 4 wheels and an engine, but brakes and tires were clearly an afterthought. I decided not dying was important, so I lost those people's phone number and worked at Wendy's for a while. Story 42. I was hired in a temp agency office as a receptionist. When I was interviewed, I was told I would be answering the phone, relaying messages, and greeting clients as they walked in, as well as some light organizing and mail dispersing, etc. I was going to fill the position of the current receptionist as she was moving up in the company. After I clocked in for my first day, I was then told how to give/handle/run the urine drug tests for clients. I don't do well at all with bodily fluids of any kind. I just can't do it. Would have never even applied for the position had I known. And then by noon, I was scolded by the boss for not knowing how to look up resumes in their database by keywords to source for possible employees for temp positions. I was never told or taught anything about any of it. I took my lunch break in my car, cried for about 2 minutes, and then left. They called me and left me a voicemail apologizing for the way I was spoken to and for not training me and throwing me into it. Story 43. Walked into a new office job on a Monday morning, and the first thing I saw was a group of people consoling a woman who was sitting on a chair sobbing. She looked up, right at me, and asked who I was. Obviously a random stranger among a bunch of people who knew each other well. I nervously introduced myself. Still sobbing, she asked why I was there. I said it was my first day as job title. Yeah, she'd just gotten fired and I was there as her replacement. She got even more hysterical, and it felt like I was about to get attacked by an angry mob. The owner of the company had hired me, and when I'd asked during the interview process why the position was open, he'd said it was a new role. It wasn't. I turned around, walked out the door, got in my car, and called the HR director as I drove off. Story 44. Dishwasher at Chili's. First day, back there by myself. Thought I was doing a decent job at keeping up. Everything is almost done, and the cooks bring me the last of their cookware. 2 seconds later, manager Dave comes back and blows a gasket saying I need to be done before the cooks are done. Just let Dave know he could finish them himself. Maybe I was supposed to go grab the cook's dishes, I don't know. Was there by myself on my first day. No breaks. Didn't get to eat my free meal. Story 45. Was hired for a sales desk position. That was what the interview was for, an indoor desk position with an assigned client list. I was even shown the desk I'd be sitting at. But once I accepted the position, I was assigned an outside sales rep to train me. That training involved me, a then 19-year-old woman, riding in a stranger's car, 40-ish man, for 2 hours to trawl the streets of San Antonio to knock on doors. When I tried to explain to the rep that this wasn't what I was hired to do, he said it's exactly what I was hired to do. He was getting the desk position while I would be taking over his outside sales job, that I had to earn the desk. Spent 12 hours down there until he was satisfied with his numbers. I sat in his car most of the time because it was cold. Once we got back, I went home and never went back. They called several times, but seriously, did they really expect me to come back? Story 46. My brother was buddies in high school with a guy our age who just inserts of ads into the weekend newspaper. It was piecemeal work, and you got paid by the piece. I went once with my brother, and we worked for like 6 hours, sorting and stuffing like 13 or 17 different ads together into the papers. Somehow it worked out to like $1.17 an hour, or something ridiculously low like that. Plus, our hands and arms were disgustingly black with newsprint bleeding off onto them. I never went back. My brother's friend was all disappointed and like, "You're just gonna leave me hanging here?" I'm like, "Hell yeah. For $1.17 per hour, I sure as hell I am." Story 47. I joined a small practice with 2 lawyers as a front desk receptionist. I was warned ahead of time one of the attorneys was extremely mean. He walked in, I smiled and said good morning as he walked by. He turned around, got in my face and said, "Don't ever smile at me again. I see right through that." I went into the bathroom and called my parents and they said, "Quit that job right now and never go back." I didn't even have the guts to tell them. I left and emailed the other nicer attorney and he said, "I don't blame you. Everyone quits because of him." Story 48. Answered an ad to do electronics sales in North Jersey in the early 90s. Get there and they send you out in a white van loaded with boxes of speakers and a fake invoice. You were supposed to approach people and be like, "Oh man, someone at the warehouse messed up and we have too many speakers. This invoice shows you what they usually go for. I'll sell them for less if you have cash." We didn't sell shit. We almost got arrested at the mall when a guy was like, "Sure, let me run back in and find an ATM," but called the cops. And when we got back with the van, the owners, obviously low-level mafia guys back when that meant something, think Sopranos, were blasting music, smoking joints, and dancing around the warehouse, pointing at the shredded money they'd scattered on the floor, saying, "See this? This is how much money we make around here." I didn't go back to see if I could sell my first pair of speakers. Story 49. Not sure if this counts, but was out of work and had a young family. Walked into local Walmart, asked to drop off CV. Was told we don't take CVs. You have to attend an info session first. Sign up in the book over there. Open up the book. At the top of the page was information about the session, time, date, etc. And in all caps, font size huge, says starting time is 6:30 sharp. Anyone even 1 second late will not be allowed in, and like 17 exclamation marks. I was like, I don't even work here and you are yelling at me? Closed the book and walked out. Story 50 bars on the beach. Helping the bartender set up the bar before open and learning the lay of the land. Manager walked by and said, "No sunglasses while on the clock," and he was wearing sunglasses. I thought it was a joke because the bartender laughed, so I didn't take mine off. Music on. Just before we opened the doors, the manager came back around and told me no sunglasses on the clock. I explained that I thought he was joking because he had sunglasses, but I took them off before guests arrived. He asked me to join him in the office, proceeded to rip a line of blow off the desk and tell me he's never clocked in. He's salary and I have to listen to him. Glasses on, walked out. Story 51. I found an ad in the paper for a nonprofit organization that was looking for paid workers and claimed a good pay rate. Got to the interview and it was their orientation and the first evening of work. They took us out for a door-to-door adventure trying to get donations for their organization. Pay was based on commission depending on how much you collected. The catch was that you wouldn't get paid for the first day of work. They were shocked when none of us wanted to try to do the job for free, and we just wanted to leave. Story 52. I told a guy who was into me that I was thinking of applying for a fun little cafe job, so he asked for my resume and applied to Starbucks for me. I surprisingly got the job after a half-assed webcam interview. The manager who hired me told me to come in at 5 a.m. for my first day, and when I showed up, the hiring manager wasn't there, and the 2 workers who were had no idea I was coming or who I was. I thought that's weird, but whatever. They trained me on filling the ice and explained what some appliances did. Prepare for burn scars from the oven. But when rush hour started, I was thrown onto the register with no knowledge of WTF I was doing. Like, I didn't even know the size names, and they got me in the front, taking orders on a computer system I never used before. I had to keep asking the workers next to me what meant what, and they seemed annoyed because they were busy handling the drive-thru. I kept apologizing to the customer, saying it was my first day, and a customer looked me in the eyes while putting $1 in the tip jar and said, "Remember, humility gets you everywhere." And I just smiled and nodded. After my shift, 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., the hiring manager who finally showed up said I am to come in at that same time for the rest of the month. I said, let's just pretend this never happened, and I never went back. Didn't even get paid for that day, but it was a novel experience, so I don't even care. Story 53. I thought I was at a second interview. Interviewer thought he had hired me. At lunch, I mentioned this was a peculiar interview. I was driving a huge tractor moments before putting out chemicals, and he said I was at my first day of work. I asked what pay he thinks we agreed upon, and he said the pay we negotiated was good, but I had to work the first 6 months at a third of that as a probation period, and then we'd talk about the permanent pay. I told him that was crazy and got up and left. It is a legit company, but a small family-run agriculture operation, and I was going to be the first non-family member in management, and he just didn't have any idea how to hire people. 15 years later, and I still won't buy their products when I see them at the grocery store. Story 54, it wasn't a job, it was a scam. I responded to a help wanted ad for marketing and advertising, which I had some background in. I showed up in a suit and tie to a small bare-bones office in a business park. I was by far the best-dressed person out of the 20 or so people doing the group interview. The CEO explained that the job would be to stand outside the entry of a grocery store and collect donations for toys for tots, which isn't really marketing or advertising. Amazingly, almost everyone got the job, which made me incredibly suspicious, but I figured I was already there. Give it a shot to see what the deal was. It's not like I had anywhere else to be. People could donate cash, but they were strongly encouraged to buy some of the overpriced crappy toys we conveniently had at our table and then donate them into the big box next to us. The CEO had shown off the plastic bins of toys during the interview, and we brought 2 of them with us to the store to set out for people to buy. A few savvy people asked about the nonprofit status of the organization and for tax information they could use to write off the donation. The manager seemed to have no clue what they were talking about. At the end of the afternoon, we went back to the office where I saw them dump the donated toys out of the box and pack them back into the plastic bins so they could go out again to be sold during the evening shift. The CEO then explained that I wasn't going to get an hourly rate, but I would get a commission for every toy I sold, and the salary they advertised was what I could expect to earn once I had a few salespeople working under me, giving me a portion of their commission. The manager I'd spent the day with explained that she'd started a few months earlier and was on her way to making great money. I got the out of there. A few weeks later, I saw on the news that they got busted by the cops. Story 55. Not sure if it fully counts as first day. I did a week of orientation with a manager who held me captive in her car for 10 to 12 hours days and legit wouldn't let me go home around 4 or 5 p.m., as I was told would be my end time. We were doing in-home photo sessions for babies from like 7, 8 a.m., and I didn't get returned to my car until around 8, 9 p.m. I was getting a ton of red flags on how pay was besides the crazy hours. They promised a set pay, but then came to find out it was based on how many sessions I actually completed each day, not how many hours I was there. And they wanted you to be a used car salesman trying to convince parents to buy a multi-year baby photo plan package to actually get a decent paycheck. Nope. Some of the houses were just plain skanky, and I was forced to breathe a cloud of cigarette smoke for over an hour with a baby and small child in the house and roaches in the bathroom. The next day after that skanky house, my first official day on my own, they went from assigning me to an area near my house, as I was told would be where I worked, to instead be in an area that was about half an hour away and far from safe to walk around by myself. I used to play pool with my mom near that area, and she would have big guys walk me to and from my car, so I knew firsthand about the safety of the area, especially with photo equipment. It's like they wanted me to get mugged my first week. I was like, nope, I'm out. The manager had me take home the equipment in my car, maybe to keep me from just not showing up. Then I was to meet her in the morning, over half an hour away, to go in her car again, before I would be sent on my own to the unsafe area. I helped her transfer all the equipment into her car from my trunk, then handed her my training paperwork as I said I quit so they couldn't go after me for theft or something, and walked back to my car. Crazy lady was staring in my car window from a foot away as I drove off.